Claremont State Historic Site. My name is Emily. I'm an educator. As they were given in America. So if you'll have seen that, you'll have noticed that I'm very Livingston centric in my presentations. This one's going a super modern, but anyway, I hope you will enjoy this presentation. Valentine's Day as a concept has been around for millennia. It's named, of course, for Saint Valentine. And going back to the era of Chaucer, there's this idea that Valentine's Day is the day that the birds mate and build their nests. So there's this idea of lovebirds, and you'll see a lot of imagery of lovebirds on Valentine's Day cards. Slide for this PowerPoint presentation. But the majority of Valentine's Day greetings at the beginning of the 19th century are pretty plain. You see pretty illustrations such as this. You could buy that to your Valentine, whether that be someone who you were interested in, someone you were currently courting, or even someone who you were married to. But there is always, a bit more personal. Unfortunately, I could not find an image, a better also is still clearly handmade. Um, the illustration that this is referencing may have been traced from a book or something like that. But if you receive something like this from your betrothed, you'd certainly be impressed by it, because it certainly took a lot of effort to make. So we're now, in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s. Store-bought Valentines become more popular, and they start becoming a little bit more intense. This sort of Valentine was very popular amongst the upper crust of society, and it's called a cobweb Valentine, which to me sounds like a really great name for like an emo rock band. And I was very confused by this name when I first came across it, but as you can see from these pictures, it makes sense. It's a variation of papercraft, where you would have to use very fine scissors and a very steady hand to create this beautiful, almost snowflake-like pattern in the paper, and then it would be attached, and you would pull it up on a string, and you could see the picture underneath. The idea behind these Valentines is that they're special. Like the image underneath, or perhaps the message written underneath the cobweb, is for your eyes only. These pictures are from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and we're super lucky because not only does the Met have a really extensive archive of these, they've also made videos and animations of how they work, and they're pretty spectacular. The fact that this Valentine is a century and a half old at the very least, and the paper is in such good shape, is really fascinating. It makes you wonder how many times it was opened. Was this little card so special that the receiver only ever looked at it every once in a while and kept it away somewhere? Was it perhaps unwanted attention and put away in a drawer somewhere? Or maybe the paper was even replaced over the years. We don't know. Example of a cobweb Valentine. In our next slide, we're going to see one that's actually really intense and multi-layered. The artistry of this one absolutely blows my mind. In such good shape all these years later is amazing. The fact that there are several layers to it is amazing. There's an inscription on the inside of the first layer, and then there appears to be a painting of perhaps a cupid underneath the cobweb of lilies and pansies and flowers. And it's really quite spectacular. A lot of time on her hands would probably be able to reproduce this, but the vast majority of these would have been made by companies. Now, that's not to say that elaborate handmade Valentines were uncommon. Of scrap paper, ribbons, fabric, even little ladies who set their mind to it could come there and pick out pieces and either or just walk in there and make the whole Valentine from the scrap paper themselves. Postal system started getting overwhelmed by these ladies coming in and to create things with paper. It's a little hard to describe. It's a lot like scrapbooking. Albums that are mixed media filled with store-bought paintings and just making these, they're almost like photo albums before photography was widely used and before we could just full watercolor scenes of perhaps the veranda, things like that. All of these things come together to be a respectable, enjoyable hobby for high society ladies. Across the Atlantic until the mid 1800s, right? Receives a really beautiful card from one of her father's business associates in England. I do want to show off some of these absolutely gorgeous. a mix of real lace that would be used for a dress. The Valentine on the left is almost entirely lace. The image of the flowers in the center was likely cut from an existing. This time, it's very common to repurpose cards, stationery, etc., to make new things. As Christmas trees become more popular, you often see people taking the Christmas cards from the year. Because it's the Victorian era, when your Christmas tree inevitably catches on fire and burns. Similar thing is happening with Valentine's early on. Um, just holding on to. On the right, though, is my absolute favorite. Because we can see this beautiful lady wearing her beautiful dress with a big old hoop on, actually made with crushed glass. That's why it looks so foil surrounding her, glass, even gilded paper. Now, we've now crossed the Atlantic Ocean to mid 19th century America. Esther Howland was an artist and a businesswoman who is the first one to bring ornate Valentine greetings to America. So Esther is a really cool lady. Esther was born in 1828 into a upper middle class family. Her father owned a stationery business in Massachusetts. She was educated at Mount Holyoke, and she graduated early. She was only 19 years old. And upon her graduation, she receives a beautiful ornament in England. Now, Esther had grown up in the shadow of the state. For the delicately cut lace patterns, the paper, the illustrations, the glittering gold, those things simply did not exist in America. So she was obsessed with this. And every girl she. So Esther has an idea. It's around the holiday season. Her father is putting in orders for different kinds. Coordinate little details that you might see on a Valentine. Things that were only available in England at the time. And her father is a little confused about why she wants all this. So she presents her business plan. Esther decided that she was going to try and bring Valentines to Americans, and she was going to do it in a very sensible way. She planned on creating 4 or 5 images as examples and sending out these example Valentines with her older brother, who would go through New England at the beginning of the year and take orders from different customers, different paper companies, stores, and even individual households for their stationery needs for the year. She thought, she might get a couple orders inspired by. Her father thought it was a pretty good idea. He had the resources, so he says, "Sure, Esther, go for it." So her then she sends them off with her brother. Her brother's gone for a couple weeks, like he is every year. And when he came back, he told Esther that he has orders for 10,000 cards. She, her order amounted to $5,000. So, bunch of her friends to come over to her parents' house. They take over one of the empty bedrooms on the third floor of the family home, and they start what is considered the America's first ever unofficial assembly line. Each one of Esther's friends had a job. One woman painted the back pictures, another woman cut out flowers and pasted them, someone else she'd send them back if they needed to be fixed. And together, but those 10,000 Valentines were just the beginning. By the next year, her order had doubled, and then it doubled home. And then by the beginning of the 1860s, just a few years, her own company called the New England Valentine Company, and her so over the next 20 years, she makes cards, and she makes them well. She had designs to fit every budget. Simple, a little bit of lace, one illustration, and just kind of a generic Valentines. For some reason, those aren't as well cataloged as the beautiful Valentines themselves. But she went from these very simple Valentines to amazing, complicated Valentines. Valentines could cost more than $50. And this is in mid 19th century money. That's not adjusted for inflation. Very quickly, Esther was making over $100,000 a year, which again is not adjusted for inflation. That's how much she was making in the mid 1860s. I'm going to go back a few slides to just point a couple things out. If you look at the Valentine that is to the left of Esther's portrait, you'll see that that is another cobweb Valentine. I hadn't noticed that when I grabbed this image, but if you look closely, you can see the string coming down. So Esther is actually using some of the designs from Victoria. And the phrases inside the Valentines, as I said, are kind of what you romantic. They're very cheesy. They're very cute. Um, Red, you see a lot of blues in some of her designs. These two, for example, they it's definitely the color scheme, but it's also just the draw are more pastel, they're more pastoral, they're calmer. The American Valentines, even when focusing on the same general ideas of love and couples and flowers, are just a lot louder, a lot more like crazy, as I said, and people are taking notice of this. The New York Times, in particular, thought that it was very silly. They actually published several articles talking about the concept of Valentine's Day and the Valentine's Day cards. I'm going to read this quote right now. This is from the New York Times, published on Valentine's Day, 1856, just a few years after Esther had started her business and really uh, began the Valentine's Day card. With a few miserable lines neatly written upon fine paper, or else they purchased a printed Valentine with verses ready-made, some of which are costly, and many of which are cheap and indecent. In any case, whether decent to develop their propensities and place them, anonymously, before the comparatively virtuous. The custom with us has no useful feature, and the sooner it is abolished, the better. The New York Times was, how do I put this? This isn't the first time the New York Times calls out young people in love and gestures of love amongst the youths, as we might say. It's something that happens to this day, not just the New York Times, but everyone. A lot of times, things that young women are interested in, and um, well, a lot of times things that young women are interested in are really made fun of by larger institutions, and that unfortunately continues to this day. But anyway, it's now the late 1850s. We're getting into the early 1860s. America is changing. The Civil War is happening. Valentines are still being sent, although they're a little calmer now. This Valentine in particular is quite lovely. It's a tent draped in the American flag, and when you open the flaps, you can see her behind him. He's thinking of her, and maybe she's thinking of him, and this card will connect them across the battlefield, wherever she may be, wherever he may be. It's very sweet. It's very loving. Of course, during the 1860s, during the war, Valentines kind of take a back seat. People are sending them, but people are really focused on the war. Ones start coming home, my goodness, do Valentines jump in popularity. More than 86,000 Valentines were processed through New York City post offices. That's not the country. That is one city's post office. 19th century, and even going forward. Esther's company Esther made these Valentines until she unfortunately fell on an icy street in Boston and was no longer able to produce them. By the time we get to the turn of the century, around 1900, Valentines are becoming three-dimensional. They're beautiful, they're gilded. Now that we're starting to have machines that help us cut paper and make these more intense designs, and so on and so forth. Of store-made cards for a while now. I personally I decided that I was going to try to make some Valentines myself. And I decided I was going to do it like a Victorian lady. I was only I wasn't going to go out and buy anything. I was going to try and use as much recycled. Now, I'm not a Victorian lady, so unfortunately I do not have those ladies had, but I tried my best. I took a little video of the process. I wanted to tell you there is music with this video. It played a little loud last time I played it. So clearly the Victorians did not have hot glue guns, but as it so turns out, I don't actually have any paste anymore, so we had to use hot glue for this project. But in the end, I made a couple of cute Valentines that I presented to the lady of the house. And that's our program for today. It was really, really exciting to learn about the history of Valentine's. Uh, I had no idea about the history of Valentine's in America. I had never heard of Edith before, and this was a really fun project for me. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions about anything I talked about today, I'll be popping into the comment section when the video is over. So thank you all for joining me today. I hope you have a lovely Valentine's Day and a fantastic weekend. Thank you.